From Hitler's birth to his final days, he forged a deep hatred of the Jews, a hatred that kept growing stronger. With motives, accusations, and reasons built in his mind, he managed to convince the world that it was necessary to annihilate them all. But why did Hitler hate them so much? Let's begin, the child who dreamed of absolute power. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in a small village called Braunau am Inn, within the province of Upper Austria in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was the fourth child of a middle-class family, made up of his father, Alois Hitler, a customs officer, and Clara Polzel, Alois's third wife. Adolf's parents were cousins, so in order to marry, they had no choice but to obtain a papal dispensation. At birth, young Hitler was baptized in St. Stephen's Church in the same village where he grew up. The chosen name was no coincidence. Adolf comes from Old High German, the earliest stage of the German language. Adel means nobility, and Wolf means wolf, so Adolf means noble wolf. Later, during his youth and adulthood, Hitler used this origin to create his own nickname, Wolf. In fact, during the Second World War, several of his headquarters adopted this term, such as the Wolfschanze in East Prussia and the Werwolf in Ukraine, among others. Adolf Hitler's childhood was hostile. He was brutally beaten, and to avoid suffering, he chose to stop crying so his father wouldn't see him as vulnerable. He performed well in primary school, but in his first year of secondary school, he was suspended and had no choice but to repeat the year. According to his teachers, Hitler showed no desire to study. However, there was one subject he followed closely and with deep interest: history, taught by Leopold Poetsch, a teacher whose ideological discourse directly influenced Hitler's beliefs. In Mein Kampf, his first book, Hitler revealed that his poor academic performance was directly tied to his troubled relationship with his father. Failing exams and ignoring teachers were his way of defying Alois. For years, father and son argued about the career path Adolf should take. Alois wanted him to graduate as a customs officer and later to be a government official, just as he himself had been from a young age. But the future Führer had different plans. Since childhood, he dreamed of becoming a painter. He was obsessed with the arts and later even defined himself as a misunderstood artist. On January 3, 1903, Adolf Hitler received news that would change his life forever. His father, Alois Hitler, had died. The event left a deep mark on him. His academic performance worsened dramatically, and he seemed to have no direction. At 16, he abandoned secondary school without a diploma. As time passed, certain traits of his personality became clear. Hitler was developing into a pan-German nationalist. He despised the ethnic diversity of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and deeply loathed the Habsburg monarchy. Years earlier, during his school years, he had already taken note of a politician he quickly came to admire, Georg von Schönerer. Alongside Victor Adler, Robert Pattei, Heinrich Friedjung, and Engelbert Pernersdorfer, Schönerer drafted the Linz Programme of 1882, a political platform that demanded the complete Germanization of the Austrian state. This meant creating an Austria dominated by Germany. The manifesto proposed ceding the regions of Galicia, Bukovina, and Dalmatia to Hungary, and also suggested making German the official language of Austria. The Linz programme had no success, as it was not supported by any influential political circles. Yet that was not the decisive factor. Schönerer's own allies abandoned him when he revealed his extreme antisemitism by adding a paragraph about the so-called Aryan race. There, he proposed excluding Jews, along with other minorities, from social dealings. This was not tolerated by Adler and Friedjung, who themselves belonged to the Jewish community. 2 years later, Schönerer publicly declared that antisemitism was the central pillar of the national idea. Vienna, the city that ignited the hatred 4 years after his father's death, after wandering with his mother through towns like Steyr and Linz, Hitler moved to Vienna for a 2-month stay with the financial help of his family. During his time there, he visited the Academy of Fine Arts, where he inquired about the admission requirements to pursue his dream of becoming a painter. A few weeks later, he returned to take the entrance exam, but lacking the necessary talent, he was rejected. After a disastrous second attempt, the Academy's rector suggested he consider the field of architecture. Yet Hitler had not completed secondary school, which made acceptance into such a university career nearly impossible. During this period, Hitler received heartbreaking news. At the end of 1907, his mother Clara died of breast cancer. The pain overwhelmed him. However, this event gave rise to a curious fact. The doctor who had overseen Clara's illness was Edward Bloch, a physician of Jewish origin. Bloch was married to Lily Kafka, with whom he had 2 daughters, Emily and Gertrude. Over time, he prospered as a private doctor. Yet he not only treated wealthy patients, he also cared for the poor, visiting them at home with his horse-drawn carriage and charging fees according to their means. This earned him the nickname the Doctor of the Poor. 3 years before Clara's death, Bloch had treated young Adolf for what was first suspected to be a lung disease, but turned out to be nothing more than a cold that developed into tonsillitis. From then on, whenever the Hitler family needed medical attention, they always turned to Bloch. When Clara showed weakness due to breast cancer, she was first operated on by another colleague who failed to solve the problem. Bloch was quickly called in. Without hesitation, he visited the family home and attempted to heal the wound with iodoform, an antiseptic that was one of the few treatments offering some hope at the time. The medication was extremely painful and had an unbearable smell. Ultimately, it was a poor decision, as it caused poisoning that soon became lethal. Bloch did everything he could to ease her suffering with morphine injections, but 9 months after the application of iodoform, Clara did not survive. Adolf Hitler was deeply grateful. Bloch had often treated her for only a few coins, or even for free. Later, Hitler sent him various paintings and postcards he had drawn, remaining sincerely appreciative. When Hitler finally came to power, he made sure to protect Bloch and his wife from many of the regime's anti-Semitic policies. He even remarked that if all Jews were like Bloch, there would be no Jewish question. This is a surprising fact, since by then Hitler was already preaching an anti-Semitic ideology. Historians have long wondered why he saved Bloch's life, despite the doctor's inability to cure his mother. That question remains unanswered. Even with Hitler's support, Bloch could not continue practicing medicine because of the Nazi ban that forbade Jewish doctors from working. Eventually, he wrote to Hitler asking for help, and, curiously, Hitler responded with kindness. Thanks to the Führer's intervention, Bloch was able to sell his home at market value and emigrate to the United States. Returning to the timeline, at the start of 1908, after his mother's death, Hitler decided to move permanently to Vienna. Thanks to a generous inheritance from Clara, he was able to live comfortably for several months without having to work. Unlike Linz, the last city where he had lived, Vienna's population was predominantly German. Although Hitler felt comfortable in the Austrian capital, he disagreed with its multi-ethnic, multinational, and multi-religious culture. By late 1909, he ran out of money, was evicted from his apartment, and fell into the deepest poverty. He had no choice but to live temporarily in a homeless shelter. During that time, he relied on soup kitchens for meals. Later, he moved into a men's hostel. He earned a living through jobs such as shoveling snow, carrying luggage at the train station, and working as a construction laborer. In 1910, he began painting watercolor postcards of Vienna, which were sold by a business partner. In Hitler's first 2 years in the Austrian capital, the city's mayor was Karl Lueger, a politician whom Hitler watched with great attention and almost loyal fascination. Lueger was born in Vienna in 1844. He began his career on the left wing of the Progressive Party, and in 1875 he was elected as a candidate for mayor. In 1885, he cooperated with Georg von Schönerer in anti-Semitic campaigns linked to the Linz program, and 2 years later he delivered a violently anti-Semitic speech supporting Schönerer's proposed law against Jewish immigration from Russia and Romania. Because of such actions, Lueger became extremely popular among the lower middle classes. This was largely due to his earthy and populist speeches, which included the economic and religious anti-Semitic prejudices common at the time. With political cunning, he managed to channel social discontent by portraying both capitalism and Marxism as products of the so-called Jewish mentality, reviving centuries-old hostility toward the Jews. In 1897, Emperor Franz Joseph I finally confirmed Lueger as mayor of Vienna after previously rejecting him several times. In that position, Lueger implemented discriminatory practices against Jews, such as refusing to hire them for municipal services and limiting their enrollment in both secondary schools and universities. He also supported politicians who actively spread the blood libel myth that Jews ritually sacrificed Christian children during Passover to obtain blood for baking unleavened bread, a Jewish religious custom. This legend originated in the 6th century when antisemitism ran rampant through the streets of Europe. At that time, the killing of a young English boy, known as William of Norwich, was falsely attributed to local Jews. Nevertheless, Lueger could at times appear compassionate or even generous toward the Jewish community. Early in his career, he associated with Jewish members, one of them being Ignaz Mandl, a Jewish lawyer who remained his friend and political advisor even after Lueger expelled him from the Democratic Party in 1889. He also employed Vice Mayor Julius Pöhrer, who was of partial Jewish descent. Lueger even appeared in a synagogue wearing the mayor's chain of office and visited Jewish homes, boasting that it was up to him to decide who counted as a Jew. Without doubt, Lueger's influence was crucial in Hitler's political development. From Schönerer, Hitler had learned the idea that Jews could never be full German citizens. From Lueger, he realized that antisemitism, combined with social reforms, could be politically successful. In Mein Kampf, Hitler described him as the greatest German mayor of all time. He even declared that his political ideology was shaped in Vienna, crediting both Lueger and the city's anti-Semitic press. Still, when examining the evidence of Hitler's actual life in Vienna, certain doubts arise. Adolf Hitler had Jewish acquaintances and business partners. In fact, all indications suggest that he did not fully embrace an anti-Semitic ideology until after he left Vienna and moved to Munich. In addition, August Kubizek, a conductor known for being Adolf Hitler's friend, mentioned that Hitler's deep anti-Semitism had already arrived with him from Linz. However, he also pointed out that Hitler's growing hatred toward all the forces that threatened the Germans was mainly directed at the Jews, who played a prominent role in Vienna. Some sources say that during his stay in Austria, Hitler called Vienna a pearl before my eyes. Yet some historians argue he never truly settled there, since he despised its people. Munich, the city that shaped the Führer. In May 1913, Hitler fled to Munich, a city of the German Empire, to avoid fulfilling his mandatory military service in Austria-Hungary. The idea of serving in an army alongside Jews and Slavs terrified him. At the same time, he was always drawn to the culture, strength, and prosperity of Germany. Hitler's present situation was far from promising. He had to wait several months to collect his paternal inheritance, and he wished to enroll in Munich's Academy of Art, though he had little hope of being admitted. On January 18, 1914, Austrian authorities managed to locate him and delivered a court summons demanding his return. Hitler argued that he had left his homeland because the racial mixture in Vienna disgusted him. The Austrian police informed him that evading military service was punishable with a heavy fine, and leaving Austria amounted to desertion, an offence equivalent to prison time. With little choice, Hitler travelled to Salzburg, where he was examined and declared unfit for military service. The First World War awakens the leader of horror. In 1914, the First World War began, a decisive milestone in Adolf Hitler's life. This historic conflict gave his existence a new purpose and even defined his vocation. Until then, his days had been marked by conflict and uncertainty, but the war changed everything. That same year, he volunteered for the Bavarian Army, which together with the German Army and the Austro-Hungarian Empire fought against France, Britain, and Russia. Despite being a foreign citizen, the authorities accepted him. On August 2nd, a 25-year-old Hitler attended a patriotic rally in Munich's central square, the Odeonsplatz. Years later, the event was captured by Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's official photographer as Chancellor, and turned into a propaganda image of Nazi Germany. Soon after, Hitler joined the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment. He received training that was both limited and rushed, and his unit was quickly sent to Belgium. They fought in the First Battle of Ypres, waged in October and November of 1914. This was Hitler's only experience in the front line of combat. Later, he was promoted to Gefreiter, the second rank above private. Roughly speaking, this position was equivalent to private first class in the United States Army, though it is often mistranslated as corporal. That was the only promotion Hitler ever received throughout the war, and he retained that rank until the end of his service. Even so, he was awarded several medals, the Iron Cross Second Class in December 1914 and the Iron Cross First Class in August 1918. In 1914, Hitler was assigned as a messenger, tasked with carrying communications to and from regimental headquarters. For the next 4 years, his regiment fought in various battles in Belgium and France along the Western Front. During these engagements, Hitler was often stationed several kilometers behind the front line. However, during the Battle of the Somme, he was wounded by a shell fragment in the upper thigh. He served actively with his unit for most of the conflict, although he also spent time on the home front. After his wound at the Somme, he spent 2 months recovering in a military hospital near Berlin. There he witnessed the widespread famine among German civilians during the winter of 1916, which continued into 1917. In September 1918, while on leave, Hitler saw the moral collapse of the German home front. These images never left his mind and later shaped his decisions on food supplies during the Second World War. A month later, he was injured in a mustard gas attack in Belgium and sent to the military hospital in Pacewalk. While recovering, he learned of the armistice of November 11th, the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II, and the outbreak of the German Revolution. These news were devastating for Hitler. Once again, everything grew dark before my eyes, he wrote. Yet he also expressed pride. I am not ashamed to say that, carried away by my enthusiasm, I fell to my knees and thanked heaven from the bottom of my heart for allowing me to live at that time. After the defeat, the so-called stab-in-the-back legend spread, a theory that became highly persuasive to Hitler. In 1919, a parliamentary commission questioned General Paul von Hindenburg, the supreme commander of the German army, about the causes of Germany's defeat in the First World War. During the discussion, he claimed that Germany had been betrayed by its own government, which, in the most critical moment of the war, did not hesitate to begin peace talks. He also stated that the German army had been weakened by the revolutionary atmosphere within its ranks and throughout the country. In that context, he cited a British general who had said, "The German army was stabbed in the back." Thus was born the stab-in-the-back myth. Some argue that the phrase came from Wagner's opera Gotterdammerung, Twilight of the Gods, first performed in 1876, where Hagen kills his enemy Siegfried with a blow from behind. This conspiracy theory claimed that the German army was not defeated on the battlefield, but rather betrayed by social democratic politicians who signed the ceasefire in order to gain power. Although the German High Command made serious strategic mistakes that prevented continued fighting, Hindenburg, together with General Erich Ludendorff, promoted this conspiratorial story to avoid taking responsibility for the defeat. At the same time, various far-right, nationalist and anti-Semitic groups adopted the myth as part of their narrative, claiming that the stab in the back was the result of a global Jewish conspiracy. In fact, even during the war, false rumors were already circulating that questioned the patriotism of German Jews in battle. For this reason, in 1916, the German government conducted a census of Jews serving in the army. The results showed that Jews and non-Jews served at similar rates on the front lines. However, these findings were never published. Today, both German and international historians unanimously reject the stab-in-the-back myth. They point out that the German army had run out of reserves and was completely overwhelmed after the United States entered the war. In 1933, when Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power, they turned this legend into a central element of their official account of the 1920s. They portrayed the Weimar Republic as the work of the so-called November criminals, who, according to them, had stabbed the nation in the back in order to seize power. Nazi propaganda used this theory to describe that period as a swamp of corruption, degeneration, national humiliation, and ruthless persecution of the honest national opposition. They spoke of 14 years of rule by Jewish Marxists and cultural Bolsheviks, finally swept away by the National Socialist movement under Hitler and the victory of the National Revolution of 1933. The Protocols of Zion spread the poison of antisemitism in the years following the First World War. At that time, Hitler was walking the streets of Munich and sensed an atmosphere favorable to antisemitism. The German city had become a hotbed of anti-Jewish sentiment. Jews were blamed for the actions of the short-lived Bavarian Soviet Republic, a communist state. It was in this context that a publication appeared in German titled The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Originally written in 1903, the text propagated anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. It claimed the existence of a secret group of Jews, the so-called Elders of Zion, who controlled the world. The protocols were first published in the early 20th century in the Russian Empire, in the newspaper Znamya, meaning the banner, edited in St. Petersburg by the prominent anti-Semitic writer Pavel Krushevan. Several scholars argue that Krushevan himself authored the protocols. When publishing them in his newspaper, he wrote both a preface and an epilogue, claiming he had discovered an authentic document that revealed a worldwide Jewish conspiracy. According to him, it was the minutes of a meeting of the World Union of Freemasons and the Elders of Zion. The early versions contained 24 chapters and alleged that these elders planned to control global politics, the economy, financial markets, the press, and education. They also claimed that Jews sought to destroy Christianity and all other religions. The text said they would profit by keeping the world in a constant state of war. As supposed evidence, Krushevan pointed to the emerging Zionist movement, which promoted the creation of a Jewish state in the ancient homeland of Israel. Some even falsely claimed that the protocols were the minutes of the First Zionist Congress, held in Basel, Switzerland in 1897, but this was soon proven entirely false. In 1905, the protocols were published as an appendix to a book about the coming of the Antichrist. The author, Sergei Nilus, was a Russian mystic and a staunch anti-Semite who claimed that Jews were agents of satanic forces determined to destroy the world. Meanwhile, Hitler rejoiced as his wish came true, that both Germany and the rest of the world began to see Jews the way he did. After the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion began circulating more widely. That same year, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne amid a popular uprising driven by poverty and food shortages. Months later, the Bolshevik Party, which would later become the Communist Party, staged a coup. The widespread fear that communist revolutions would spread across Europe reinforced one of the main conspiracies contained in the protocols, that Jews were behind communism and responsible for revolution. This completely false accusation became known as Judeo-Bolshevism. In 1919, the protocols were translated into German. During the 1920s, various editions appeared in the United States, especially in cities like New York and Boston. At the same time, copies were sent to London and Japan, translated into their respective languages. In 1921, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion were translated into Italian, Swedish, and Norwegian, and 2 years later into Polish. By 1925, they were already available in Arabic in Syria. With the spread of the Protocols came new books promoting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Among the most notorious was The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem, written by Henry Ford, founder of the Ford Motor Company. This book was translated into 16 languages, including German. Over time, the details of the text were modified to fit the political climate of each country. Although newspapers such as the New York Times, journalist Herman Bernstein of the New York Herald, and British diplomatic correspondent Lucian Wolff published articles debunking the protocols and proving they were false, the damage had already been done. A large part of European and American society accepted many of the text's claims as true. During the 1920s, Adolf Hitler read the protocols thanks to Alfred Rosenberg, a prominent Nazi Party ideologue and author of The Myth of the 20th Century, a book that developed various Nazi racial theories. These ideas helped Hitler reinforce his convictions, making him realize that even if he had not written those texts, his beliefs were reaching the minds and hearts of many people. In Mein Kampf, Hitler claimed that the protocols revealed the true nature and activity of the Jewish people and exposed their ultimate goals. Although once in power in 1933, Hitler did not directly mention the protocols in his public speeches, he frequently repeated many of the falsehoods they contained, including the claim associated with Judeo-Bolshevism. On the eve of the Second World War, and throughout it, Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda of the Third Reich, understood that he could exploit the protocols of Zion to further demonize the Jews. Yet years earlier he had written in his personal diary, "I think the protocols of the elders of Zion are a forgery. I believe in their intrinsic truth, but not in their factual authenticity." In other words, Goebbels considered that even if the document was false, it was useful to advance the Nazi regime's anti-Semitic agenda. As a result, Julius Streicher, editor of the anti-Semitic newspaper Der Stürmer, published numerous articles during the 1930s based on the ideas contained in the protocols. The Nazi Party's central publishing house issued 22 editions of the protocols between 1919 and 1938. During the Second World War, the Nazis circulated countless editions of the text in every country they occupied. Even in 1943, after millions of Jews had already been murdered as part of the final solution, German authorities were still publishing editions of the protocols in Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian. They did the same in France, Belgium, and Poland. The silent rise. No one wanted to see. In the summer of 1919, Adolf Hitler joined the information office of the Bavarian military administration. Its purpose was to gather intelligence on political parties in Munich and provide anti-communist political training to the troops. At the same time, Hitler attended an anti-communist propaganda course, spending long hours listening to lectures on history and politics that deeply influenced his thinking. In August of that same year, Hitler delivered his first anti-Semitic political speeches to soldiers and quickly discovered his talent as a speaker. He began to refine his style. His supervisor was impressed by his communication skills and asked him to write a response to a student's question on the Jewish question as a racial problem. Hitler valued the trust placed in him and worked hard to draft a perfect text. In it, he repeated lies about Jews rooted in economic nationalist and racial antisemitism. He also emphasized the urgent need for a nationalist government that would completely expel the Jewish people from Germany. In September 1919, Hitler attended a meeting of the German Workers' Party, or DAP, where he delivered an improvised speech that made a strong impression on party leaders who invited him to join their ranks. Hitler accepted, and on October 16, 1919, he gave his first official speech in a beer hall. His oratory skills allowed him to rise quickly within the party, working closely with its leaders on drafting the political program, which he personally announced at a mass rally held on February 24, 1920, in Munich's Hofbrauhaus Beer Hall. Shortly afterward, the DAP was transformed into the NSDAP, the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. In English, it became known as the Nazi Party. At the end of 1920, Hitler left the Bavarian army and moved into a small rented room in the city centre. From that moment on, he devoted himself entirely to politics. He began to receive increasing financial support, either from internal party funds or from the income generated by his political speeches. By mid-1921, Hitler had consolidated himself as the leader of the Nazi Party. The Gemlich letter, the beginning of a deadly ideology. In 1919, barely 10 months after the end of the First World War, Adolf Hitler drafted a manuscript in response to a conversation with Adolf Gemlich, a colleague in the Munich Military Intelligence Office. One of Gemlich's tasks was to create propaganda for the German army, which is why the document became known as the Gemlich Letter. Before writing the text, Hitler had spoken with Captain Ulrich Mayer, who suggested he meet with Gemlich to help spread the idea that Jews were responsible for Germany's defeat in the Great War. According to Marvin Heer, dean of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, this is the first political document in which Hitler openly outlines his plans regarding the Jews. He considers it hard to imagine a more important text for understanding the ideological roots of the Second World War. It reveals the reasons to wage that war in the mind of the man who would lead it, Adolf Hitler. In the letter, Hitler argued that antisemitism was often dismissed as an emotional phenomenon, but that this was a mistake. He insisted that antisemitism as a political movement should not be defined by emotion, but by the recognition of facts. Throughout the text, Hitler claimed that Judaism was not a religion but a race, accusing Jews of being hoarders of wealth, whose true aim was to conquer the world through money. He declared that the danger of Judaism was reflected in what he described as the natural aversion many Germans felt toward Jews, supposedly based on personal contact that almost always left a negative impression. With explicit hatred, he added, "Every man pursues a higher goal, religion, socialism, democracy. For the Jews, these ideals are nothing but a means to an end, satisfying their craving for gold and domination." Hitler distinguished between two forms of antisemitism, the emotional type, expressed in pogroms and spontaneous attacks, and the rational type, which he said must be translated into systematic action to suspend Jewish rights. Yet his ultimate goal was even more extreme, the uncompromising elimination of Jews as a people. He concluded that if a strong government were to lead the German Empire, it could effectively confront the so-called Jewish threat by denying their rights. But he insisted that the final objective had to be the unwavering removal of all Jews. Even without political power, Hitler made his ambitions and convictions clear. According to Marvin Heer, in this letter, Hitler sketched out a vision that demanded a ruthless government with the courage to eliminate them completely. Already as a young, unknown figure in German politics, Hitler understood that this struggle could not be carried out by gangs or sporadic violence, but only through a state organization. Without a doubt, regardless of the particular positions of other leaders of the Third Reich, this letter shows that the seed of genocidal antisemitism in the Second World War originated in Hitler's own mind. Still, experts clarify that despite the letter's revealing nature, it does not indicate the exact strategy that would later be applied to eradicate the Jews. They also point out that the German word Hitler used for this elimination was Entfernung, a term which in the post-war context could mean expulsion, removal or distancing, and not necessarily systematic mass murder, as would later occur during the Holocaust. Two signatures that changed the fate of the world, Versailles and Weimar. At the end of the First World War, 50 countries signed the Treaty of Versailles, an agreement concluded in 1919 between the victorious powers and Germany. The treaty declared Germany as the main culprit of the war, and for that reason it was forced to accept harsh conditions, the compulsory disarmament of its army, heavy financial reparations to the victorious nations, and the loss of large territories. The German population received the treaty with deep resentment. They saw its conditions as both humiliating and impossible to pay. In contrast, the United States refused to sign it, convinced that such harsh measures would only lead to greater disasters in the future. In a speech delivered in Munich on April 13, 1923, Adolf Hitler said the following about the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty was created to bring death to 20 million Germans and to completely ruin the German nation. In that same speech, he also stated that the expulsion of Jews from German blood would inevitably lead to atrocities against the Jewish people. One related issue in this context is the Balfour Declaration, which some experts argue was indirectly linked to the Treaty of Versailles. It was a letter sent by the British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Baron Lionel Walter Rothschild, leader of the British Jewish community. In 1922, the League of Nations incorporated the declaration into the British Mandate over Palestine, officially granting the United Kingdom responsibility for administering the territory. The letter read as follows: Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. During the first years, nearly 100,000 Jewish immigrants settled in Palestine. This raises a question. Knowing the Balfour Declaration, why did Hitler not send Europe's Jews there? The truth is that the idea was initially discussed in some Nazi circles as a possible solution to the Jewish question, but it was soon abandoned for both ideological and geopolitical reasons. First of all, Hitler never considered relocation a true option. In his worldview, Jews were not merely Germany's problem, but the root of Europe's ills, and his objective was their elimination, not their resettlement. Moreover, Arab resistance was strong. Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, firmly opposed Jewish immigration, fearing it would lead to the creation of a Jewish state. In fact, he held meetings with Nazi officials to block such migration and shared Hitler's hostile vision toward Judaism. For these reasons, Hitler never seriously considered using Palestine as an alternative. Instead, he chose to win the Mufti's support by pursuing the elimination of the Jewish people, the failed coup that gave birth to Mein Kampf. The first 4 years of the Weimar Republic, the nation that replaced the German Empire, were marked by deep economic crisis. The First World War had left the country devastated and starving. By 1923, the Nazi Party already had more than 50,000 members, eager for action against the democratic government. On the night of November 8th, Hitler launched an attempted coup d'état, later known as the Beer Hall Putsch. The event took place in the Bürgerbraukeller beer hall in Munich, where Gustav Ritter von Kahr, the Bavarian Prime Minister, was addressing a rally. Hitler, who had not been invited, felt deeply insulted. Waiting outside were stormtroopers loyal to the National Socialist movement. When his personal bodyguard unit, the Stoßtrupp Adolf Hitler, entered the hall, Hitler fired his pistol into the ceiling, interrupting the meeting and declaring that the national revolution had begun. He quickly forced Kahr, along with 2 other Bavarian leaders, von Lossow and von Seisser, into a side room, where he threatened them at gunpoint. Under pressure, they returned to the main hall and announced before the crowd the supposed formation of a new government. But Kahr soon took advantage of Hitler's disorganized planning, denounced the coup, and ordered the army and police to crush the uprising. Hitler was arrested, tried for high treason, and sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison, a minimum security facility. Yet despite the failure, he skillfully exploited the scandal to spread his propaganda. Until then, he had little popularity, but suddenly the national and international press turned him into a well-known figure. In the end, he served only 8 months of his sentence, time he used to write his first book, Mein Kampf. With this work, he sought not only to earn money, but also to build an ideological platform to spread his views and attack those whom he claimed had betrayed Germany. The original title he considered was 4.5 Years of Struggle Against Lies, Stupidity and Cowardice, but he shortened it simply to Mein Kampf, My Struggle. The first volume was published in 1925, followed by the second in 1926. The publisher himself was dissatisfied with the book, but Hitler cared little. He knew it was written for those already convinced of his ideology. From the beginning, it became a commercial success, though few people ever managed to read it entirely, not only because of its 800-page length, but also due to its complex language. In 1934, with Hitler's rise to power, there was a true explosion in book sales, 1 million copies in a single year, priced between 7 and 12 marks, depending on the edition. This was a considerable expense given the salaries of the time. Over time, copies were even given as gifts to war veterans with disabilities, university graduates, and newlyweds on their wedding day. The book began with the following sentence: "In compliance with the sentence issued by the People's Court of Munich on April 1, 1924, I began my imprisonment at Landsberg prison." Hitler then explained the book's purpose. The progress of great movements in the world has generally depended on great speakers. However, he considered it essential that the doctrine be laid out in writing. In this way, Hitler promoted one of his greatest skills. Throughout its extensive pages, he denigrates and demonizes Jews, constructing an extreme conspiracy about the meaning of Judaism as an institution. Some of his statements reveal his most abominable hatred toward anyone who identifies as Jewish. The Jewish doctrine of Marxism rejects the aristocratic principle of nature and replaces the eternal privilege of power and strength with the mass and its dead weight. In doing so, it denies the value of the human personality, questions the importance of nationality and race, and removes from humanity the premise of its existence and culture. As a foundation of the universe, this doctrine would bring an end to any intellectually conceivable order for man. And just as in the largest recognizable organisms, the result of applying such a law could only be chaos. On Earth, it would mean destruction for its inhabitants. If, with the help of its Marxist creed, the Jew triumphs over the peoples of the world, his crown will be humanity's funeral crown, and this planet, as it has for thousands of years, will drift through the ether bereft of mankind. That is why today I believe I act according to the will of the Almighty Creator. In defending myself from the Jew, I fight for the work of the Lord. To what extent is the existence of this people based on a continuous lie? It is incomparably demonstrated by the protocols of the elders of Zion, so hated by the Jews. They are based on a forgery, laments and shouts the Frankfurter Zeitung weekly, the best proof of their authenticity. Because once this book becomes common property of a people, the Jewish threat can be considered destroyed. Since the Jew is not the attacked but the attacker, not only does he make his opponent his enemy, but also anyone who resists him. Yet the means he uses to break upright souls is not open warfare but lies and slander. He stops at nothing, and in his vileness reaches such heights that no one should be surprised if among our people the personification of evil takes on the living form of the Jew. The ignorance of the masses about the true nature of the Jew, the lack of instinct, and the short-sightedness of our upper classes make the people easy prey for the Jewish campaign of lies. While the elites, out of innate cowardice, reject a man attacked by Jews, the masses, out of stupidity or naivety, believe everything. State authorities remain silent or, as often happens, persecute the unjustly slandered, which, in the eyes of these officials, maintains state authority and safeguards public order. Jewish domination in the state seems so firm that now one can not only proudly call oneself Jewish, but also openly admit one's national and political intentions. The end will not only be the loss of freedom for the peoples oppressed by the Jew, but also the end of this parasite. After the death of its victim, the vampire inevitably dies as well. Despite its commercial success, the book faced sharp criticism from various newspapers, which accused it of being full of empty formulas, pathetic phrases, and meaningless trivialities. Journalist Stefan Grossman even expressed doubts about the author's mental health in an interview. Sven Felix Kellerhoff, author of Mein Kampf, the story of the book that shaped the 20th century, described it as a chaotic and repetitive book. The enormous number of digressions weakens its structure. In general, only two aspects are clear: Hitler's radical antisemitism with fantasies of extermination, and his belief that he was destined to secure the future of the German people by conquering living space in the East, a goal he hoped to achieve through an unrealistic agreement with Great Britain. Many historians agree that Hitler drew on numerous sources and that his ideas were not original, except for the way he combined everything he had read, particularly the protocols of the Elders of Zion and the International Jew. They also accuse him of making demonstrable errors in parts of his supposed autobiography, as he embellished fragments of his story to provoke certain effects on his audience. The hidden story of Hitler's Jewish friend. Despite his hatred for Jews, Hitler managed to form a friendship with a young girl of Hebrew origin. She even came to be nicknamed the Führer's daughter. Her name was Brynjardin Nienau, better known as Bernila Nienau. She was born on April 20th, 1926, in Dortmund, Germany. Her father was Dr. Bernhard Nienau, who died shortly before her birth, and her mother was Caroline Morgenstern, a nurse. The Nuremberg laws, which determined people's racial origins, classified Bernila as one-quarter Jewish. In 1928 they moved to Munich, and although she experienced some discrimination, she was able to maintain her citizenship in the Reich. In the spring of 1933, while Hitler and his followers were building concentration camps to imprison and exterminate Jews, 6-year-old Bernil and her mother positioned themselves among visitors to Obersalzberg, where Hitler resided. Hitler was captivated by her bright blue eyes and blonde hair. Believing her to have an Aryan appearance, he invited her for a closer visit. Curiously, by that time Hitler already knew that Bernile's mother and grandmother were Jewish. Despite this, their friendship lasted about 6 years. Bernil often called him Uncle Adolf, while he referred to her with a pet name. They shared the same birthday, April 20th, and often celebrated together. Among the 17 letters preserved after the war is one Bernila wrote to Adolf Hitler and his chief advisor, Wilhelm Bruckner, dated September 27, 1936, in Munich. Dear Uncle Bruckner, I have a lot to tell you today. During the holidays we were at Obersalzberg, and I was able to see my dear Uncle Hitler twice. Unfortunately, he has never come up. I'm already working on Christmas gifts. I'm knitting socks for Uncle Hitler again because I asked if the ones from last year still fit, and he said yes. This year I can use finer yarn. Mother only helps me with the heel. They will be very warm, and since he travels so much, it is important that his feet are not cold. Mother also sends her greetings and many kisses from your Bernile. On April 19, 1938, Fritz Wiedemann, Hitler's aide, described Hitler's indifference to the girl's Jewish ancestry as a purely human attitude. However, when Martin Bormann learned of the friendship, he prohibited both Bernil and her mother from entering the residence. Heinrich Hoffmann attempted to publish photographs of Hitler with Bernila, but Bormann strictly forbade it and informed Hitler of the decision. Although books containing these photographs sold successfully, Hoffmann was no longer allowed to photograph her. Bormann took it personally and ordered all books featuring Bernil to be destroyed. The ignorance of the masses regarding the true nature of the Jew, the lack of instinct, and the short-sightedness of our upper classes make the people an easy prey for the Jewish campaign of lies. While the upper classes, out of innate cowardice, reject a man attacked by Jews, the masses, out of stupidity or naivety, believe everything. The state authorities remain silent or, as often occurs, persecute the unjustly slandered, which, in the eyes of those officials, is maintaining state authority and safeguarding public order. Jewish dominance in the state seems so firm that one can now not only be called Jewish with pride, but also admits relentlessly their national and political intentions. The end will not only be the loss of freedom of peoples oppressed by the Jew, but also the end of that parasite. After the death of its victim, the vampire inevitably dies as well. Despite its commercial success, the book faced harsh criticism from various newspapers. It was accused of being filled with empty phrases, pathetic expressions, and trivialities with no real value. Journalist Stephen Grossman even expressed doubts about the author's mental health in an interview. Sven Felix Kellerhoff, author of Mein Kampf, the story of the book that shaped the 20th century, described it as a chaotic and repetitive work. The enormous number of digressions weakened its structure. In general, only 2 aspects stand out: Hitler's radical antisemitism with extermination fantasies and his belief that he was destined to secure the future of the German people by conquering living space in the East, a goal he hoped to achieve through an unrealistic agreement with Great Britain. Many historians agree that Hitler drew from numerous sources and that his ideas were not original, except for the way he combined everything he had read, particularly the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and the International Jew. They also accuse him of demonstrable errors in parts of his supposed autobiography, as he deliberately embellished fragments of his story to provoke certain effects on his audience.